Okay, what I would like to do tonight is to speak about the dangers of a politics of empire and imperialism. Imperial aspirations, I will suggest, are not just risky and dangerous internationally, but they also pose threats to peace and democracy at the national level. My focus will be on neo-Ottomanism and Turkey, less as cases representing an empire, but more as empire aspirant. But even though my emphasis will be mostly on neo-Ottomanism, much of what I will say in relation to politics of empire applies to empires and imperial visions in this part of the world as well. The talk will specifically focus on neo-Ottomanism, a term used to describe the shift in Turkish foreign policy in recent years. I will talk about the historical trajectory of neo-Ottomanism so far and its risks regionally, internationally, as well as at the national level. I will end the talk speaking about what a politics of peace may look like and how it may present an alternative to the dangerous politics of empire. Before I focus on neo-Ottomanism, I would like to start the lecture by saying a few things about changing strategies of US/NATO imperialism in the Middle East. I start with this as I think it provides an international context for neo-Ottomanism. So what are some of the recent shifts in US and NATO imperialism, especially the shifts that have occurred in relation to Islam and Islamism? There has been plenty of discussion in public and academic discourse on recent US wars in the Middle East. There have also been detailed analysis of and discussion on the thesis of the clash of civilizations as one that has informed the war on terror and Western foreign policy in the post-9/11 world. Not so much noticed or analyzed in academic work or in the media has been a shift in US foreign policy towards Islamists that has occurred around 2006 and 2007. The shift involved moving away from categorically considering Islam as in conflict with the civilizational values of the West towards a search for moderate Muslim, Western-friendly partners in the Middle East, who would now be preferred over secular nationalists as potential allies. The now friendly relation with some Muslim groups in several ways resembled the Cold War strategy of supporting Islamist groups against communism. Even under the Bush administration, changes were already underway by 2005 to change the terms of engagement with the Muslim world. Under a classified new strategy dubbed Muslim World Outreach, Washington engaged in a surge of activities promoting moderate Islam through quietly funding Islamic radio and TV shows, Muslim schools, Muslim think tanks, political workshops, or other programs. Seymour Hersh reported in the New Yorker in 2007 of a redirection in foreign policy policy towards support of moderate Islam. He explained how Condoleezza Rice outlined the new policy to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as involving a new strategic alignment in the Middle East that would separate reformers and extremists. The Sunni states, including Saudi Arabia, were defined as the reformers, whereas Iran, Syria, and Lebanon's Hezbollah were defined as extremists. Following George W. Bush's presidency, the shift in policy became more explicitly defined. Obama declared that he would make Muslim outreach a cornerstone of his presidency, arguing that the Bush presidency had severely damaged relations with the Muslim world. In his famous Cairo speech in 2009, Obama called for a new beginning, a new way forward, based on mutual interest and mutual respect. The seemingly more positive approach to Islam and Islamism may appear more peaceful than the previously dominant, openly hostile and militaristic approach informed by the clash of civilizations perspective. The approach can be problematized and has been problematized, however, in the way it classifies Islamisms on the basis of their proximity and friendliness to US foreign policy, and in the ways it has attempted to engineer and manipulate political realities and manage political dynamics in different countries. The governing Justice and Development Party in Turkey, the AKP, has received a very favorable treatment by Western leaders and in the Western media in the last decade, until very recently, due to the expectations of the role Turkey, defined as a moderate Muslim and democratic country, could play in this new Middle Eastern strategy as a model to the rest of the Muslim majority countries in the Middle East. Until the Western media finally started paying attention to some of the discontent in Turkey with the Gezi movement just a few months ago, there has been a resounding silence, a deliberate tendency to be and remain blind to several seriously anti-democratic developments in Turkey, such as the fact that there was increasing repression on journalists, striking workers, Kurds, students, environmentalists, or any group which seemed to oppose government policy. And the fact that Turkey had exceeded any country in the world, including China and Iran, in the number of journalists in prison. Reactions to what have come to be described as neo-Ottoman policies of the AKP have also been overwhelmingly positive. The congratulatory, almost celebratory language used by most Western observers and commentators on neo-Ottomanism differs significantly from that used for other non-Western powers aspiring to imperial power, such as China. This suggests that rather than a potential threat, neo-Ottomanism might have been perceived as an asset. In 2009, Obama had his first foreign trip as president to Turkey. During the trip, he declared that the Justice and Development Party, the AKP government, was a model partner and pillar of the NATO order. The International Crisis Group also described Turkey as the envy of the Arab world, delighting in a robust democracy, a genuinely elected leader who seemed to speak for the popular mood, and an economy that is worth about half the whole Arab world put together. Patrick Steele wrote in the New York Times about the rise of Turkey in 2009. Some other headlines in the international media were, Turkey leads the Muslim world. Could this be Turkey's century in the Middle East? Turkey has a role to play. Turkey is becoming a regional broker. Turkey can and must mediate in the region. And we need more Erdogans. Erdogan is the name of the prime minister. Now I would like to define what neo-Ottomanism means and speak about its historical trajectory so far. The Turkish Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister of Turkey have rejected the attachment of neo-Ottoman label to their foreign policies, while they have frequently made direct or indirect references to the Ottoman Empire in their public discourse and policy. Considered by some as representing a new geographic imagination and a civilizational geopolitics, Neo-Ottomanism provides a vision for foreign policy as well as for internal relations. Based in Ottoman nostalgia with pan-Islamist undertones, it advocates influence over and closer relationships politically, economically, and culturally with countries in the Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans, with countries which were once part of the Ottoman Empire. Some have used the term to characterize foreign policy under Prime Minister, an earlier period under Prime Minister Özal in the 1980s and early 1990s. Most commonly, however, the term has been used in relation to policies of the AKP. For the last decade, Ahmet Davutoğlu, who has first served as chief advisor to Erdogan from 2002 to 2009, and since 2009 has been serving as foreign minister, is seen as the architect of Neo-Ottomanism. I believe that it would be a mistake to treat the imperial aspirations represented in Neo-Ottomanism as equivalent or comparable to US or NATO imperialism. This, however, does not mean that Neo-Ottomanism is not consequential. On the contrary, I will argue that it has major implications for peace in the Middle East and internal peace in Turkey. Neo-Ottomanism aspires to expansionism in Turkish foreign policy on the basis of geographic proximity as well as assumptions and assertions regarding a common history and common cultural identity. And by cultural, the references are mostly to an Islamic identity. As Turkish foreign policy has throughout the history of the Republic since 1923 radically disconnected with policies of the Ottoman Empire, Neo-Ottoman versions of Turkish history and foreign policy interpret the whole history of the Turkish Republic since the 1920s as a deviation from an otherwise theological path of empire building. They see that whole period of 85 years or 75 years or so as just a mistake or as a complete deviation from an otherwise continuous path. Neo-Ottoman discourse repeatedly uses the term of return to the Middle East. The calls for return to the Middle East, however, do not just represent a vision of stronger relations with other countries on the basis of mutual understanding, equality, and solidarity, but rather a vision which assumes natural leadership over Middle Eastern countries and aspires to a revival of at least some dimensions of imperial supremacy. Now I would like to say a few things about the historical trajectory of Neo-Ottomanism as we have seen it so far, especially in the last 10 years. Initially, Neo-Ottoman aspirations were carried through what has been dubbed a new no problems with neighbors policy. Turkey tried to improve relations with all of its neighbors, as well as making gestures to resolve long-standing conflicts and difficult relations, for example, in relation to Armenia, Syria, and Cyprus. In this earlier period, Turkey seemed to be following a course independent of US foreign policies, especially as it stayed out of the Iraq War, improved relations with Syria and Iran, and defended the Palestinian cause. Despite the seemingly independent course Turkey followed in this period, Turkey's position can be characterized as consistent with US interests. Graham Fuller, longtime employee of the US State Department and the CIA, now serving as a senior analyst with the Rand Corporation, wrote that, quote, letting Turkey be Turkey would provide much more value to long-term US interests than pressuring Turkey to meet short-term US needs, end of quote. As much as this might become complicating and irritating for the United States and might work in ways that partially dilutes and complicates Turkey's relationship with the West, Fuller argued, it also enriches and complements it. As Yeşilyurt and Akdevelioğlu pointed out, Turkey's significance for the West was not simply based on Turkey passively serving the image of a model country. More importantly, it has been the possibility and ability of Turkey, to serve as a soft power, inspiring and enabling change in the absorption of other Middle Eastern countries in a new international order. Despite some discussion to the contrary, it would be accurate to suggest that for the most part, Neo-Ottomanism has represented a continuation of, rather than a break with, Turkish cooperation with Western geopolitical plans during and in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War period. Turkey has participated in the Afghan War, has allowed transit US military flights from its Incirlik base, even though it has not participated in the Iraq War, and it has also been complicit in CIA's extraordinary rendition program by allowing the use of the Incirlik base for transits and refueling. This earlier period of Neo-Ottoman policies that has been dubbed no problems with neighbors shifted significantly with the start of the Arab uprisings. Since the beginning of the anti-Gaddafi uprising in Libya, Turkish foreign policy changed from a soft power, zero problems with neighbors policy to one that has become more militaristic and interventionist. Until recently, this shift has moved in tandem with US and NATO policies in the region. The shift has been most clear in Turkey's policies on Libya and Syria. In relation to Libya, the turnabout in the Turkish position was very striking. On February 28, 2011, Prime Minister Erdogan stated that a NATO intervention in Libya would be pure nonsense and questioned what Libya had anything to do with NATO. Less than a month later, however, on March 21, 2011, he expressed a very different position. He said, NATO should intervene in Libya to ensure that Libya belongs to the Libyans. In relation to Syria, Turkey initially assumed a mediator role, asking for reform, yielding to the demands, asking for reforms for Assad to yield to the demands of protesters. But it rapidly moved from this position to a position of demanding regime change. By August of 2011, the Turkish Prime Minister was not hesitant in directly challenging Syrian sovereignty. Prime Minister Erdogan stated, quote, "We do not see the Syrian issue as an external affair. The Syrian question is our internal affair, because we share with them a border of 850 kilometers. We have ties of kinship, history, and culture. Therefore, we cannot passively watch what is happening. We need to do whatever is necessary." End of quote. The Turkish government and the media explained the shift in policy as one that takes its direction from the Arab masses. They said that the zero problems policy had become unrealistic and unsustainable at a time when the Turkish government wanted to express solidarity with the rising masses, rather than with authoritarian regimes in the Middle East. Since 2011, Turkey has become increasingly embroiled in the Syrian conflict, hosting meetings of opposition groups, and according to several different reports, enabling the transfer of weapons to or directly arming the opposition. Many observers fear that Turkey has become a clear party to the Sunni Shiite or Sunni Alevi sectarian divide in Syria and in the region. After the settlement negotiated last month between US and Russia on the Syrian handover of chemical weapons, the Turkish government has expressed disappointment and has continued to stress the demand for regime change. There are concerns that the position Turkey has taken in the conflict is contributing to intensification of the conflict rather than towards peaceful negotiation and resolution. The policy of unconditionally supporting rebels in a war that has become increasingly brutal is seen as dangerous in a region that is already deeply fragmented by sectarian, religious, and secular Islamist divisions. Ironically, at a time when Turkey expected increased prestige and influence in the region, within a matter of just 2 years between 2011 and 2013, Turkey's relationship to its neighbors in the region has moved from zero problems to a state of no friends in the Middle East. In addition to the serious tensions with Syria, there are tensions with Iran over Syria policy, as well as the fact that Turkey is housing a missile defense shield system against Iran. It has very serious tensions recently with Iraq, which is accusing Turkey for interfering in its internal affairs. And recently, after the overthrow of the Muslim Brotherhood by the army, Turkey has very serious tensions with Egypt. In addition to tensions with other governments, some of the formerly ardent supporters of the Turkish model in the Arab media are also expressing their disappointment with Turkey's foreign policy, especially problematizing the fact that Turkey has dangerously taken sides in a sectarian civil war. Recently, the term precious loneliness has been used to describe Turkey's foreign policy position. The term is coined by Ibrahim Kalın, foreign affairs advisor to the Prime Minister. Kalın tweeted on July 31st that he did not accept the assertion that Turkey has become isolated in the Middle East, but added that even if this were true, it needed to be called a precious isolation. He was clearly trying to attribute a unique moral stance to Turkey, the implication being that Turkey is the only country, East or West, that is taking idealist, principled positions in regional crises and developments, such as the position they have taken in opposition to the military coup in Egypt. Observers, however, point out to contradictions and hypocrisy in the government's positions in national and international politics, questioning whether it has really been idealism of the government that has created the present situation. We may want to ask why and how Turkey has ended up in this new position of so-called precious isolation. How it has moved from a win-win, no problems policy with neighbors to a position of almost complete isolation. Observers suggest that there has been a serious underestimation of on the part of Turkey of the complexity of regional and international politics, as well as an overestimation of Turkey's sense of power to influence the outcome of conflicts. Playing a large part in this underestimation of the nature of the conflict and misunderstanding of the country planned to be intervened is also an element of imperial arrogance. Specifically, it might have been a Turkish Orientalism, similar in many ways to its Western counterpart, that has been standing in the way of understanding the history and present state of Syria. The understanding or the interpretations of the situation in the country has been based on simplifications, creating blindness about the complexity of the history, society, and the polity. In addition to imperial aspirations towards wanting to liberate Syrians, specifically Sunni Syrians, from an Alawite Shiite dictator, Turkish Orientalism, very much like its Western counterpart, has assumed that Arab societies have remained simple, passive, and static since they have severed their relationship to the Ottoman Empire. There has been an assumption that they have had no history except for a series of dictatorships. And the so-called Arab Spring has been seen as an awakening for otherwise sleeping societies. The perspective I come to this analysis with is not an international relations realism, trying to figure out what strategically went wrong and how strategically policies can be corrected. Rather, I'm interested in implications of neo-Ottomanism for peace, democracy, and justice. Neo-Ottomanism affects not just foreign policy, but it also has huge implications for internal politics in Turkey. I will be focusing specifically on three different implications, three different negative implications. The first one has to do with relations with Kurds and the peace process. As Turkey took an increasingly interventionist role in relation to the Arab uprisings, it became subject to increasing criticism internally and from abroad for not being able to resolve its own Kurdish question. After decades of civil war with the Kurdish PKK, which had significantly escalated in recent years, the Turkish government started a peace process in the spring of this year, 2013. Negatively viewed by Turkish nationalists, this policy or this process was initially welcomed by several other groups in Turkish society. At the same time, there have been concerns on the part of some Turkish political groups, as well as Turks wanting a lasting peace, that the peace process has been started as an extension of the Neo-Ottoman vision, as an Ottoman peace, as İhsan Dağı has called it, that rather than attempting to genuinely make peace with the Kurds by addressing Kurdish grievances and demands, the peace process might be based on strategic calculations for a megalo-idea project, one of a greater Turkey project, aiming to create a larger, stronger Turkey and a Turkosphere in the region by having Kurds on board. If the peace process is perceived by Kurds as focused on a strategic partnership for power, as opposed to genuine attempts towards a democratic and peaceful future together, there is the danger that the process would not go forward. And there are already signs that it is not moving very smoothly forward. The Syria war, or Turkey's relationship to the Syrian civil war, has also recently increased tensions with Kurds. In northern Syria, there has been fierce fighting between the Py.D, which is the Kurdish group in that region, and Islamist groups, including al-Nusra and an extension of al-Qaeda, for control. The Islamist groups in this area are supported for Turkey, and Kurds in Turkey identifying with the Kurds in Syria are increasingly concerned about the government's position of supporting these Islamist groups. A second serious implication internally of neo-Ottomanism that I would like to mention has to do with the sectarianism in foreign policy, especially in relation to Syria, creating serious fears and concerns among the Muslim minority group, the Alevis in Turkey, as well as secular Turks. When Islamist militants are being supported in Syria, there are very serious fears that this would have a possible influence in Turkey. Tensions are especially high in the Hatay province near the Syrian border. The bomb attacks on 11th of May in the town of Reyhanlı this year, the bomb attacks which killed around 51 people and wounded some 140 people, has been seen by many people in Turkey as an outcome of the government's policies in relation to Syria. As a third major implication of neo-Ottomanism in internal politics, I will want to make a reference to what neo-Ottomanism means in relation to democracy in Turkey. For the 3 terms the AKP has been in power for the last 10 years or so, Turkey has experienced increased authoritarianism. As it has become increasingly clear in the government's reaction to the Gezi movement, there is now a clear tendency to interpret all opposition and dissent to the government as treason and conspiracy against a great and greater Turkey project. This not only leads to increased repression by government, but also, and more importantly, leads to provocations by the government and part of the media to polarize the society between the supporters of the government as the real actual citizens of the country and the rest who unnecessarily stir problems and create tension. The degree of othering has reached such a level that recently a pro-government paper has called the protesters the children of Byzantium in reference to the fact that they have never supported the idea of the Turks invading or taking over Istanbul in 1453. Well, I believe that given the knowledge that the audience in the room has about the consequences of US and NATO imperialism, and what I have said in relation to other imperial aspirations on the part of other nation states, we can safely say that imperial politics and imperial aspirations seem to lead to polarization, sectarianism, violence, and war, whether they are represented by US and NATO or by a regional empire aspirant. Imperial policies also lead to increased authoritarianism in most cases internally, and we know this when we look at the very serious attacks on civil liberties in the United States, Canada, and other Western nations. A politics of empire based on priorities of power and control can produce neither a good understanding of politics in a region, nor any good solutions to problems and conflict. In recent years, there has been a popularization of some wrong-headed approaches to peace, is embodied in the concept of humanitarian intervention and the doctrine of the responsibility to protect. If you like, we can have a discussion on this later, although it's not my main focus. These approaches offer new forms of imperial politics inconsistent with democracy or with sustainable peace. A politics of peace, peaceful coexistence, and lasting peace can only be based on principles of equality, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. I want to suggest that a politics of place, as defined by Arif Dirlik, may present the best, or one of the best, alternatives to imperialist politics on the one hand, and identitarian, sectarian politics, and ethnicist, exclusionary nationalisms on the other hand. Arif Dirlik offers politics of place as an alternative to what he sees as the two dominant and competing political logics of the modern period. Identity politics, ethnic nationalism on the one hand, and a neoliberal imperial cosmopolitanism presented by globalism on the other hand. Advocating a new form of politics informed by places, Dirlik aims to clearly distinguish place-based politics from essentialist place-bound nativism or ethnicist politics. So he does favor the idea of a place-based politics while distinguishing it from a notion of place-bound politics. The concept of place allows for a political imagination that is based on a contextualized and historicized understanding of the relationship between the different peoples who have interacted and coexisted in places over time, as well as the relationship between the local, regional, and the global. A politics of place allows ways to remember, acknowledge, and address historical tensions and injustices between and among peoples, while allowing for an imagination at the same time of peaceful coexistence. At an analytical, intellectual level, a politics of place can replace false universalism, as well as the culturalism and Orientalism frequently associated with imperial perspectives. It can engage with the here and now, as well as the complex history of the here and now. It can engage with the full living reality and complexity of a place with its heterogeneous and plural reality, rather than addressing communities imagined along sectarian and ethnic nationalist lines in the present, and illusional aspirations of imperial grandeur for the future. Politically, a politics of place can offer ways to construct peaceful coexistence rather than aiming for power and hegemony along ethnic, sectarian, or imperial lines. You might say, beyond this abstract conceptualization, what could a politics of place as a politics of peace look like? Can we see any glimpses of it anywhere? I will provide you with two glimpses as to what this politics may look like, based on some concrete examples. The first example I would like to refer to has to do with conceptualizing and imagining place through a politics of naming. In Istanbul, a third bridge is being constructed over the Bosphorus. On May 29th this year, Just around the time the Gezi protests were starting in Taksim, the government announced that the bridge would be named Yavuz Sultan Selim Bridge, honoring one of the Ottoman sultans of the late 15th and early 16th century. As much as the construction of the bridge itself, which was very problematic as it has been seen as a major threat to the environment and the ecosystem surrounding Istanbul, the name that it was proposed for the bridge immediately became very controversial. Yavuz Sultan Selim was the conqueror of Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, and the sultan who claimed the caliphate, which is equivalent of popedom for Islam, for Ottoman sultans. He was known for his cruelty and is specifically remembered for the massacre of tens of thousands of Alevis who were considered heretics. The naming, which emphasizes the Sunni character of Turkey, has not only been considered especially insulting for Alevis, as well as secular Turks in Turkey, it is also seen as problematic in the context of sectarian and other tensions in the region in relation to Iran, Syria, and Iraq. The intervention made by Gültan Kışanak in the debate over naming seems to be informed by a politics of place. Gültan Kışanak, who is one of the co-chairs of the Peace and Democracy Party, BDP, the Kurdish party in the Turkish parliament, commented that while it is useful to remember the history of Istanbul, the history of the city is not just one of the palace and the sultanate. Seeing the city as such, she argued, is based on a denial of Anatolia, the Asia Minor. As Istanbul is a city that connects Anatolia to Europe, Kışanak suggests that Istanbul can also be represented as connected to the people of Anatolia and as the synthesis of Anatolia. In this spirit, she asked, why not name the bridge after Yunus Emre? Yunus Emre was a poet and Sufi mystic who lived in the 13th century in Anatolia, known for his humanism as well as his excellent use of a simple Turkish accessible to common people, which was very untypical of his time. In his mystic folk poetry, Yunus Emre's name offers a very different sense of history than that of Yavuz Sultan Selim. The second glimpse into what a politics of place may look like, I want to take with references to the Gezi movement this past summer. The Gezi movement can be a good example for a politics of place. Not only did the movement originate in concerns over urban public space, but it also grew as a protest movement addressing several different grievances in relation to neoliberal policies and policies of urban development, the environment, and so on, emerging out of the concrete social, economic, and political conditions present in Turkey. The Gezi movement, most visible in the Taksim Square in Istanbul, but also very active in 79 out of the 81 provinces in Turkey, represents a politics of place that created solidarity of and among people of cities, regions, and the country in relation to the lived conditions, lived reality of cities and regions and the country. The Gezi movement developed a politics that successfully went beyond identitarianism. It offered visions and concrete examples of collective existence outside capitalism and neoliberalism. Refreshingly, it has also come to represent a politics of place able to overcome the major fault lines in Turkish politics. Perhaps the biggest present the Gezi movement has provided for the future of Turkish politics, a present with the most positive implications for peace, has been the nature of political solidarity established in the park. The camp established in Gezi Park during the days the police partially withdrew from the park not only brought together groups organized around vastly different politics and identities, environmentalists, Kurdish activists, secular Turkish nationalists, groups of Muslim activists, socialists, anarchists, feminists, and LGBT activists. More importantly, it fostered solidarity among these groups, which started to shatter the deep fault lines and divisions that have characterized Turkish politics in the last few decades. Specifically, the nature of interaction in Gezi Park and Taksim has created an atmosphere where political fault lines along Turkish, Kurdish, secular, religious, and Sunni Alevi divisions have started to be cracked. This way, participation in the movement became transformative for the activists. Groups of nationalist Turks and activists from the Kurdish movement, who deeply distrusted each other's politics and could not see eye to eye until a few weeks before, not only started to tolerate each other, but also came to the realization that they did share several common issues of concern and some common notions of a better society. The social and political divisions between religious Muslims and secular people also seemed to be shattering during this time in interesting ways. Even though the majority of participants in the protests have been organized around secular concerns, groups of religious Muslims have expressed solidarity with the grievances, ideas, and visions behind the protests. A number of Muslim feminists and Muslim intellectuals publicly expressed their critique of government policies of urban renewal and development on the basis of Islamic values and notions of social justice, and expressed their full support for the protests. Taksim Square also became a site for Friday prayers and a celebration of a religious day organized by a group which called itself Anti-Capitalist Muslims. There have been other important gestures of solidarity. When they heard rumors that there were harassments of women in headscarves in parts of the city, women in Gezi Park, secular or religiously identified, immediately expressed that they were against provocations to instigate a secular Muslim divide. Feminist and socialist women marched under the leadership of Muslims Against Violence Against Women and firmly condemned the attacks. After the dispersal of the commune in Gezi Park by the police in mid-June, what has been called the spirit of Gezi continued through several different kinds of events and gestures of solidarity. Istanbulites met in nightly forums organized in several parks around the city throughout the summer. And in these forums, they discussed a number of issues, from the very neighborhood issues to issues at the national level and even at the international level, and so on. The LGBT Pride Day on June 30th this year attracted 10 times the number it had in 2012, largely due to the sense of solidarity created in the heyday of the protests. As importantly, the Gay Pride event witnessed several slogans of solidarity with other causes and groups. During Ramadan, anti-capitalist Muslims organized several public events for breaking the fast. Many secular people and those people whose appearance or lifestyles would not be easily associated with conservative Islam, such as LGBT people and activists, enthusiastically attended the events and were in return embraced by the organizers. Here, I'm not trying to draw a very rosy picture of what has happened. There are conflicts, there have been challenges, and there are huge obstacles to the development of these glimpses of what is possible, what could be possible, and so on. But I just want to give you the sense of what politics of place as opposed to imperial politics or identitarian ethnicist or sectarian politics may look like, so that we do end with a more positive note, and that we are indeed able to imagine how things could be different.